Well, welcome everybody to the 2018 Emerging Writers Festival. Let's have a round of applause. So, my name is Bruce Snyder. I'm on the English department faculty here, and it's my pleasure to get to introduce the introducers tonight, who will be introducing our visiting writers. And the Emerging Writers Festival is something that, as many of you know, we do every year. And we do it in the spring in April, and it's our chance to bring 5 writers, a mix of fiction writers, nonfiction writers, and poets, to come for 2 days. And they're writers who are still in the early stages of their career, and the idea is that they still are close enough to that first book publication, that first award and fellowship and so forth, that they can kind of share their experiences with the students of writing and the community members that we have come here, and that they can sort of share their insights and wisdom and talk about the writing life and the life of the writer and share their work with us. And so over the next 2 days we're going to have 3 events. We have an event, our first reading tonight, and then we are going to have a panel tomorrow at 4:30. For those of you who are interested on the writing life, where all 5 of our writers will be coming to answer questions. It's going to be a very informal conversation. That is in McLaren 252, as I said, at 4:30 tomorrow. So please come out if you're free. The third event is tomorrow evening at 7:45, and again, it will be in this room. So tonight is the first of our events, and I should say, the 5 writers that we have here as part of our event is poet Philippi Williams, prose writer Patricia Horvath, fiction writer Jung Yun, poet Christopher Kempf, and prose writer Elizabeth Greenwood. So we have 2 of the writers who will be reading tonight, Philippi Williams and Elizabeth Greenwood, and tomorrow we'll be hearing a reading from Patricia Horvath, Christopher Kempf, and Jung Yun. So, before we get started, I just want to say just a few thank yous. First to the College of Arts and Sciences for supporting this event. They generously underwrite this every year. I also want to thank our graduate student assistant, Kat Lewis. Let's have a round of applause. Who has kept everything going. I want to thank Kimberly Garrett in the English department, who keeps the English department running and does a lot of organizing for this event. I also want to thank Micah Ballard and David Garcia in the MFA program. And I want to thank the USF bookstore for coming and selling books for us tonight. And I should tell you, all of the writers' books are here for sale, so I hope that you will all buy them, support these writers. They're here, get them, I'm sure they would be happy to sign the books. This is your chance. So one of our traditions that we have at the festival is that we pair student volunteers, some of our really amazing young writing students in the undergraduate English department. We pair them with these writers, and so we have an undergraduate student will be introducing each writer. So tonight we have English major Haley Pope, who is going to be introducing Philip, and Kathleen Torres is going to be introducing Elizabeth Greenwood. So I think that's about it. I'll introduce Haley Pope to introduce Philip. You're right. I made a mistake. We're flipping the order. I read the order on my sheet, but actually it will be Kathleen who's going to be introducing Liz. So Kathleen, I know you're here.
So, hi everybody. So I really love watching historical dramas on Netflix, and I recently watched one called Tulip Fever, which is about the Dutch tulip mania in the 1630s. And so it's about this lady who falls in love with the artist who paints her portrait, and but she's married, so she has to fake her death in order to run away with him. And so she like does the whole process and finds out that he like ran out of all his money, and it's a fiasco. So anyways, if you read Elizabeth Greenwood's Playing Dead, you would know that this is actually a really plausible story. People have been faking their deaths. People have been actually faking their deaths since the beginning of bureaucracy. So a woman in the confines of marriage may very well have thought that that was her only escape. And so this book comes out of a very real desire to leave the physical and emotional pressures of society. A lot of people who were in debt or who just need to escape for any reason wanted to, and I'm sure Elizabeth will go into that as well. So she describes motives, mistakes, and actual procedures for death faking in her story Playing Dead. And she is actually an alumna of USF. She completed a history major with a philosophy minor here in 2006, and then went on to have a very successful career. Her work has appeared in anthologies and major news outlets such as Poets and Writers, Guernica, Al Jazeera English, The New Yorker, among many others. She's been a writer in residence at many organizations, including the Norman Mailer Center and the Sultan Stowe Foundation for the Arts. And then she currently teaches at Columbia University. So everybody please welcome her up to the stage.
Hello, thank you all so much for coming out on a school night. Really appreciate it. Thank you so much for that beautiful introduction. So I'm going to be reading a little bit from my nonfiction book, Playing Dead. I don't think there's much you need to know yet. I'm going to skip around a little bit, but I'll explain everything. I always like to tell people how long I'm going to be reading for, because when I'm in those seats, I'm like, will it ever end? And it will end in 20 minutes. I've timed it. So, all right. This is from Chapter 3, The Canoe Man. John Darwin hadn't kayaked in some time, but on the afternoon of March 21st, 2002, he felt inspired. Neighbors recalled seeing him crossing the street with his bright red kayak, or canoe in local parlance, hoisted over his head. When the 51-year-old corrections officer failed to appear for his shift that evening at the Home House prison in Stockton-on-Tees, England, Anne, his high school sweetheart and wife of over 30 years, reported him missing. Authorities kicked off a search party, with helicopters from the Royal Air Force swarming the gray skies over the North Sea, hundreds of rescuers combing the rocky beaches, and Coast Guard boats hunting for Darwin. After scouring the area for 16 hours, they discovered only a paddle 100 yards offshore. Police canceled the search. Rescuers noted that the water had not been especially rough the day Darwin disappeared. In the months that followed, no corpse washed ashore. Anne mused on her unique predicament to reporters, quote, "People die, have a funeral. They have a headstone. There's something to mark the fact they existed. I want to bury his body, enabling me to move on," she said. Her sons, Mark, 26, and Anthony, 24, returned home to care for their mother. She tossed rose petals out to sea at the spot where her husband vanished. But no bloated body would wash up to provide the family with closure and to make Anne an official widow. No corpse would materialize because for a great deal of the time he was considered dead, John Darwin was actually upstairs in his own home. He had colluded with his wife to fake his death and erase his debt by collecting insurance payouts. He assumed the identity of John Jones, a man born the same year but who died in infancy. With an authentic British passport in Jones's name, Darwin traveled the world while Anne sold off their properties in England. The couple used those proceeds to buy a penthouse in Panama City and a plot of virgin jungle. After Darwin turned himself in nearly 6 years after his initial disappearance, a photograph of Anne and John beaming in a Panamanian real estate office would surface. Mark and Anthony thought their father had been dead the entire time. I like that fact. In surround sound. On the day I arrived in Seaton Carew, England, 11 years after John Darwin's legendary disappearance, the clouds hung so low in the sky it felt like being in a basement. Situated an hour southeast of Newcastle on the North Sea, the Silvery Water is the main attraction here. Seaton Carew has been billed as a seaside resort town since the mid-1800s when the stately Staincliffe Hotel was built. Since Darwin's return, the Staincliffe has renamed 2 of its restaurants the Darwin Room and the Canoe Bar. And a few doors down and built not much later sit 2 mammoth adjoining Victorian gingerbread homes that John Darwin used to own. What led me here was the chance to learn from someone who had successfully faked his own death, at least for a while. I hope that if I spent enough time with him and learned the particulars of his strategy, his knowledge and experience could seep into me via osmosis. It's hard to overstate John Darwin's pop culture cachet in the United Kingdom. When Darwin wandered into a London police station in December of 2007, he quickly became the story of the year. Maybe it was the slow holiday news cycle, or the universal fantasy of leaving one's life behind, or the delightful schadenfreude of the plan going awry, but readers couldn't get enough. The former prison guard is still synonymous with pseudocide in the UK. Darwin's death fraud put him at the top of the pseudocide survival of the fittest heap. He had recently been released from prison when I sent him a letter. When I opened my email to be greeted by a message from John Darwin 6969, a wave of adrenaline coursed through my body. Having devoured all the salacious tabloid articles about him, I felt as if I was speaking to a celebrity. I was a little taken aback, yet totally psyched that he was so game to talk to me. I didn't know if, having lost so much, he'd be offended by the request. But it became clear pretty quickly that he has embraced the throne of the man who claimed dominion over his fate and paddled out to sea. He said I could come to England and that he'd show me the beach where the course of his life took a sharp turn. Standing on the stretch of sand, if you squint, hold your breath, and focus your gaze on just a few inches of ocean horizon, the place looks pleasant enough. But inhale, and the olfactory system is assaulted with the stench of raw sewage draining into the ocean. Look to the left, and you see the old coal docks that service the underwater collieries. The beach is stained black from shale that still washes up on shore 30 years after the last mines closed. Industrious folks drive flatbed trucks down the shore and shovel the black sand to sell to the local power plant for cheap energy. Look to the right, and you've got the belching chimneys from the Petroplus Teesside refinery and docks for shipping containers coming to port, flanked by giant turbines catching the relentless wind that slashes your face. Picture an off-season Myrtle Beach, cross with Pittsburgh, and you have Seaton Carew. But the place does possess its own grim beauty. I find myself drawn viscerally to the winding old streets and low-slung homes, the wild elderberries forming canopies over the damp sidewalks. The land resonates with me in a primordial way. The Rust Belt shit town where I grew up, Worcester, Massachusetts, boasts its own dreary downtown, much like Seaton Carew's, where the main beachfront drag is home to a video arcade, a fish and chip shop, and a burger joint that roasts the patties to the consistency of mulch, and everything closes at 4 in the afternoon. My neighborhood in Worcester, too, possessed a handful of loiter-friendly businesses like the Mini Mart, the liquor store, and the Keno Lounge. Neighboring Hartlepool, a mile north of Seaton Carew, has a fluorescent-lit mall with the same hallmarks of my adolescence. Dollar stores, a McDonald's with a long line, and lots of skinny boys in track pants with sunken cheeks and narrowed eyes. The north of England also resonates with me because this is the land of my ancestors. They were part of the Puritan diaspora from Yorkshire in the 1600s, part of the Great Migration to America, which begat the Appalachian white trash and aspiring Southern gentry who would earn the distinction of good name, no money after the Civil War, and ultimately evolve into our current manifestation of wasps who get drunk in drafty houses in lieu of emoting. I've always felt I come from no place. Northern English does not a fascinating heritage make. Even the Irish Catholics who populated Worcester seem downright exotic in comparison. This is, of course, the agony of being a privileged majority, but weirdly, here in the north of England, centuries after my relations boarded ships to evade being burned at the stake, I see myself in the citizens. The ghostly pallor, the hooded eyes heavy with alcoholism, depression, and a lack of vitamin D, the upturned ski slope noses the Viking pillagers gave us, the pudding soft bellies. I have found my people. John Darwin's story struck me as an English story, but a Northern English story in particular. Many locals I talked to told me through gritted teeth that there are two Englands, the South and the North, or more to the point, the rich and the poor. Industry has historically been located in the North in the form of factories, shipbuilding, coal mining, and steelworks. Service and creative classes have always been located in the South. Prior to Darwin's caper, the town did not register in anyone's mind as a place with much to recommend it. But adjacent Big Brother Hartlepool is synonymous with the monkey hanging, a tale from the Napoleonic Wars that captures the nature of the sheltered locale. Fearing an attack, fishermen were on the lookout for invaders. They paid close attention to wreckage from a French ship washed ashore. There were no survivors, save a soggy pet monkey dressed in military garb for the sailors' amusement. Having never met a Gaul, the fishermen questioned the monkey in an impromptu beach trial and determined him to be a French spy. They sentenced him to death and hung him from a fishing boat's mast as a gallows. Today, he is immortalized in a bronze monkey hanging statue. Visitors can toss coins into his open arms. You can buy monkey hanging keychains and mugs in the local history museum. Quote, "They really thought he was a person," John would later explain. Quote, "The people are a bit backward here." John's rubbery, expressive face betrays his British stoicism. He gives sidelong, twinkling glances when he's being mischievous, typically about whichever titsy Russian pops up on his cell phone, quote, "women who want to meet me," or when referring to, quote, "the pair of identical twins who, you guessed it, also seek a private audience with the Canoe Man." He suffers from high self-esteem, which is what it takes to even conceive of faking your death and getting away with it, outsmarting law enforcement and insurance investigators. John from England with blue eyes is how he describes himself to the women he meets in online role-playing games, several of whom he visited abroad when he was dead. When we met, he was 62 and balding, but in sturdy shape. He often goes for long walks along the blustery waterfront in steel-toed boots. He finds people his own age, especially women, to be adventure-adverse wet blankets. Darwin speaks often of his acts of bravery, eating wild mushrooms covered in live maggots, kayaking without a helmet. "Crash hats are for wimps," he says. Drinking water straight from the tap in every far-flung country he has visited. In another life, he might have been an explorer. In his 2012 memoir, The Canoe Man, Panama and Back, he presents himself as haplessly virile, seduced by a parent when he was a young teacher, a profession he entered because he, quote, "loved the idea of long, long holidays." Quote, "There was me, a good Catholic teacher, standing behind and making love to the mother of two of my pupils in my own classroom. The noise seemed extremely loud, the sound of my hips slapping against her flesh," unquote. He has programmed his cell phone ringtone to play a Clint Eastwood Western melody. He refers to the period of adventure after his disappearance as when I was dead. He lists foods that are aphrodisiacs and waits for your reaction. He says, women are my drug, and describes himself as a randy old man who, despite a 6-year, 3-month prison sentence, a divorce, and an estranged son who will not speak to him, still has a lot of vim, vigor, and joie de vivre. His devil-may-care attitude toward life is inspiring, if a bit troubling. Since his dramatic return from the dead nearly a decade ago, John Darwin has occupied the sweet spot of D-list celebrity that tabloids are built upon. Not famous enough to be insulated by handlers, yet still popular enough to garner fascination. People ask for me autograph, he says with amusement. The Daily Mirror follows his goings-on with the same kind of train wreck rubbernecking that In Touch Weekly heaps upon the likes of Real Housewives in the United States. He went with a local radio host friend to see heavyweight champion boxer Frank Bruno give an after-dinner speech. Upon entering the banquet hall, Darwin was recognized instantly, and the audience began applauding for him in spite of the star on stage. He describes this encounter as a bit embarrassing. He also set up a makeshift photo booth for fans to take a picture with him for £5 a pop, the proceeds of which he says he donated to charity. Such celebrity comes with rabid fans, such as a stalker, his word, named Lorraine Forbes. They struck up a correspondence when he was serving time. She wrote every few weeks, sealing her letters with lipstick kisses and promises of option 3. Darwin explains the options. When I was in prison, we wrote, and she gave me 3 options. Number 1 is a meal. Number 2 is the cinema. And number 3 is a damn good night bonking. The perks of celebrity are not limited solely to groupies like Forbes, but also extend to Her Majesty's Royal Mail. Forbes still writes Darwin, and not knowing his latest whereabouts, simply addresses the envelope to John Darwin, Canoe Man, his bungalow, Seaton Carew. And the letters always find him. So I'm gonna skip ahead just a little bit. So what happened with Darwin? Financial ruin, on the precipice of just bankruptcy, all these things. So with the help of his wife, they colluded to fake his death. He decided, I'm worth more dead than alive. So they went for it, staged this kayaking accident. She picked him up. He then went, took a train to the western coast of England, where he hid out for a few months. And that's where I'm going to resume. All you need to know is, yes, they had this guest house next to theirs that they rent out just to tenants. So that'll come in a minute. Okay, continuing. While authorities investigated John's disappearance, he camped out on the rocky, frost-covered shore of Phillip on the west coast of the country for almost 2 months. Living rough is how Darwin describes the time after his initial disappearance and during the investigation. He slept on a cheap air mattress in a tent on the beach. He ate canned beans and candy bars and read paperbacks from charity shops. He always had a fire going at night, not just to stay alive in the freezing weather, but to boost his morale. He explained his false identity. I told people I'm from York, which is about an hour south of Seaton Carew. I'm an ornithologist, and I'm working my way down the coast. I knew people would accept that. The secret to lying, he tells me, is keeping near the truth as possible. John would call his wife from a payphone daily to get updates. Disguising his voice in a deep grumble, he would pose as a prospective tenant. It's amateur dramatics, he explains. If the police were in the house, Anne would keep up the ruse. She controlled the purse strings and had begun submitting paperwork with the mortgage insurance company that would fix their financial bind. I would call and she'd say, you trapped me, but I had no money and she wasn't going to contact me. From John's vantage, Anne was the one with the upper hand, not him. Another part of the reason he camped in Phillip was to develop the piece de resistance of his master plan and what would actually keep him shrouded as he hid in plain sight, his disguise. He grew a long white beard, lost weight from living rough, and bought a pair of tinted glasses and added a limp and a walking stick. He practiced his new gait down the beach. When Anne eventually picked him up 2 months later to drive him back to the cliff, She passed him, quote, without a flicker of recognition. I looked right at her through my dark glasses. When your own wife doesn't recognize you, I knew it was good, he says. By the time Anne retrieved her gaunt and bearded husband, police and family members were still coming around. But the thought of those luxurious empty guest rooms in the cliff was enough to drive John crazy. It had come to the point where I couldn't take it anymore, he says. So with his disguise intact, Anne dropped him off a mile away from their home, the scene of the crime. He walked in the front door of number 4, where all their other tenants entered, and opened the door to the room for Carl Fennick, his assumed identity. Anne was chatting in the hall with another renter when he entered. Oh, he's a new one, the tenant remarked. Yeah, Anne said, they're changing all the time. It seems totally inconceivable that Darwin was able to return to his home after being presumed dead. But he slipped seamlessly between the guest side and Anne's side of the sprawling double house through a series of connecting stairs and corridors that had remained intact between them since they were built in 1924. When the story broke, the press made it sound as though he was hiding in a garret-like compartment behind the wardrobe. One publication cheekily titled the Darwin story, The Liar, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. Not only did he live next door and sleep in the same bed as his wife, king size, he is quick to point out, but he also lived in the house intermittently for 5 years. This is the part that captures my imagination and somehow endears John Darwin to me in spite of his Machiavellian scheme. His duplicity encapsulates the joy of faking death. Things are not as they seem, and the mundane facts of life might hold a secret, an alternate reality right under our noses. It's like training my gaze on the one tranquil slice of the Seton-Carew horizon while neglecting to see the rest. Forget about the sons and the wife and the financial crimes for a moment and just look at the brains and the balls that faking death requires. It's nothing short of magic. When John was dead, he spent his days in much the same way he does now. Surfing the internet, tooling around the house making improvements, walking along the waterfront into Hartlepool to window shop. The only problem was the police and detectives would often be inside the house when he was ready to come home. So he came up with a code for Anne to alert him to stay away that took him, quote, 15 seconds to devise. He tells me as we walk along the ocean just across the street from numbers 3 and 4 at the cliff, their homes. Anne would signal to John that detectives were inside by hanging the parlor curtains straight down, and he would keep walking. But if he saw the curtains tied back in the window, it meant the coast was clear and he could enter. Pretty devious, I say, as we gaze at the 2 homes, which look shabbier than they do in the photos that ran in every UK newspaper when Darwin returned. I would say clever, he counters. Intelligent, he sniffs. The point is, you could see the code from a long way away. He recalls one day when he was out for his daily constitutional in full disguise. Walking back home to the cliff, he says, quote, my heart nearly stopped because in front of me was my father and my brother walking toward me. This wasn't the first time he had encountered people from his old life. He often passed former colleagues and acquaintances on the street. I usually had my glasses on, so I'd look away, not make eye contact, he explains as we sit in the cafe section of a box store called Asda, the English answer to Walmart. So what did he think when passing friends and family? Damn good disguise, he says. Thank you.
Hello. We ready for some poetry now? Yeah. Okay. Wait. In the opening lines of his first full-length poetry collection, Thief in the Interior, Philippi Williams writes, wasn't night what lingered, where sweat left salt, where breath touch expired? These lines were my first point of contact with Williams's writing, and I remember audibly gasping as I read them on the bus, drawn in instantly by the music, detail, and creative syntax of these few words. If I had only known what would come in the following pages. As a young poet, it is an absolute privilege to be introducing Williams tonight. Philippi Williams was born in Chicago, Illinois, and received his MFA from Washington University. In the past year alone, he was the recipient of the Kate Tufts Discovery Award, the Whitting Award, and a Lambda Literary Award. He currently teaches at Bennington College and is the poetry editor of the online journal Vinyl Poetry. His poetry collection, Thief in the Interior, is a fascinating experimentation in form and language. While taking on subject matter such as racial oppression, violence, masculinity, sexuality, and more, this poetry challenges the reader to reevaluate their expectations of what a poem can or should be. It asks, does a poem have to look like a typical sonnet, a villanelle, a lyric cut into straight lines and straighter stanzas? Or can a poem look like a noose, a twisting Mobius strip, a sonnet with a cut wrist and flies, as one poem in the collection is titled, that stretches across 3 pages? Williams's poetry takes these forms and more. Tonight he will be reading a mix of old work and new work, and I am sure it will all be wildly musical or visceral or challenging or all of the above. Please welcome Philippi Williams.
Hi. Oh, it's a lot of you. Thanks for coming. Thank you for having me. I'm very honored to be here. Yeah, a mix of the poems from the book Thief in the Interior. So when I'm doing this, I'm reading from the book. If I'm doing this, it's not been, I don't know where it is, it's just new. It's still working on it. I'll open with one of the newer poems. The Void. Our dog died in the ugly disaster that is aloneness. She died on the first floor in my sister's apartment on a makeshift pad shifted halfway from beneath her, and I caught the center of her dying, the shake, the afterbit tongue swelling from her mouth. My girl, good girl. She half died alone and half died with us there. My sister and me rubbed her side, and she shook and blinked, then blinked no more, but breathed a slow breath as I rubbed her head, then kissed her forehead. Even in death, she was mine to kiss. She was not ugly, much like the story of the boy from school who was shot in the head and lived to talk about it, and lived to hear us all talk about it. The hole that needed the help of others to close, and his neighbors around him looked into the hole in his head as if slowly realizing they'd all that time been watching a friend climb from the vortex of skin, bone, hush. The hole puckering like a fish, and the head it inhabited didn't move, didn't twist, wasn't dead, but dead quiet. And I imagine the hole like a howl from a dog, like the diamonds in a chain link fence that let sight in but not the flesh. This is the end. Do not enter or take part in what little you've seen here. Howl like a warning, howl like a plea. Do not pass, do not step into this shape in which everything ever missing takes shape. The dead dog buried in the backyard, the contour of sorrow that is any boy's back, darkening then disappearing altogether from the door, on his way to school, on his way coming back. But he must leave first. Everything must leave before it comes back. Even the trees, here maple mostly, lining the one-way streets flanked by liquor stores, bright as the mansions of angels, and their spirits lining the windowsill. They're burning genies that must leave the bottle and enter the body in order to permit our desires. Even the trees must first catch fire, drop their fire, stand naked in penance as we rake their garments to the gutter. Yes, even wakefulness must go towards sleep, and sleep must wake. Even the boy leaves, then comes back as air, as a mind trick on replay, and each replay unwinds a truth, reprints itself but askew. Was our dog 13 or 14 when she died? When I kissed her forehead, she was already gone or still passing through. The last bit of her knowledge mixing with my sister's breath, the vet appointment of no use now. I closed her eyes. It's no use, how's the entrance wound, but they fixed up the boy who spoke another language for a short time, the maple trees bowing to hear him better, beyond their dancing boughs, in spite of their leaves that let in a little moonlight, a little street light, so that gaps of leaf-shaped darkness gasped across his face, mouth-shaped leaves on his face, and they spoke back to the whole. We too leave, we all leave. Hush, you'll come back. Lazarus, concrete Christ, a memory, a haunting, a possession like an illness, like a bullet, like a dog's eyes staring back, then merely open with no looking involved, like a boy's head babbling on. Y'all are so sweet, thank you. Do-rag. Oh, darling, the moon did not disrobe you. You fell asleep that way, nude and capsized by our wine, our bump and grind shenanigans. Blame it on whatever you like. My bed welcomes whomever you decide to be. Hung, mistress, bride's bouquet, John Doe in the alcove of my dreams. You can quote verbatim an entire album of Bone Thugs and Harmony with your ass in the air. There's nothing wrong with that. They mince syllables as you call me yours. You don't like me, but still invite me to your home when your homies aren't near enough to hear us crash into each other like ours. Some men have killed their lovers because they loved them so much in secret that the secret kept coming out. Wife gouging her husband with suspicion, churches sneering when an usher enters. Never mind that. The sickle moon turns the sky into a man's mouth slapped sideways to keep him from spilling what no one would understand. You call me God when it gets good, though I do not exist to you outside this room. Be yourself or no one else here. Your do-rag is camouflage patterned and stuffed into my mouth. Y'all just nasty. That's all that is. Filth. Stop it. Trying to reach out some poems up here. And so this is an excerpt from a longer poem that I've been working on called Interruptive. I'm just going to read one section of it. It's like 11 pages long, but we don't have time for that. It just deals with me trying to understand the definition of war, being someone who's never participated in war, being always on the outskirts of war. Between his war with self and the war in a sand-sealed country neither of us could spell, Juvie took from our what little childhood Chicago hadn't taken. Between bloody showers and rushed meals, him forced by bigger boys until pain became expectation and expectation pleasure. A shortened sentence meant fighting for a country against people for whom R held no hatred while hating the ones he fought for. There is venom in coercion, misnamed loyalty, boys and bloody water in his head when he left to fight in heat and camo. Then in the barracks shower, 3 soldiers raped R. Sand is the plaza of pardon. Wind draws its name across the grains and leaves the grains with the name it gave. Who would I be after so many tried to live in me forcibly? R in the desert, our Skype lost connection when an explosion blew out what little service he had. Oh shit, we've been hit. Then blackout silence, and my pulse explicit. Let us rejoice in this. War is a love song that makes your body dangerous to others, that makes you unlivable. You become more private. You're always early to yourself. When I saw him again, marijuana discharged him dishonorably, and the men inside him shooting guns and shooting cum went with him. This is one veteran's legacy, one man I know and have lost to distance, my own pulling me from everything I meant to hold close. What do I know of exile but self-imposed self-removal? When R kissed my forehead goodbye the first time, I felt citizenly, patriotic, my white handkerchief au revoiring a friend from my mind who returned with sand hissing down his pant legs. Who made an hourglass out of him? For what does his countdown drop its grains, skull to heel? Everyone's dead in my poem, so here's another one. I'm an elitist. That's why I have jokes in between. Okay. Sonnet with a cut wrist and flies. 1. Blade to the soft, and the soft flashed open was the breakage of robins. 2. Blood dripped to the floor, splashed on the towel, painted a big toe. 3. The slit would talk back, sweet nothing in a red gown. 4. Wrist, noun, the carpus or lower part of the forearm where it joins the hand, to explore the joint, window hinged on the edge of the body, to slice it, to peek into the cut and find the ribbon. 5. Blood veined by the rhapsodic. 6. A single mouth, its total face. 7. Risk, verb, to expose to the chance of injury or loss, hazard, to risk one's life. As the mind was made enterable, a boy stepped into, was natural in him, was his and spectacular. 8. And arteries plucked quatrains perfected through wreckage. A man waited in the pulse. 9. A man found in the wrist who wanted out, but who put him in. 10. He spoke the 4 languages of the heart. He would touch the boy, would. 11. Hurt the boy and translate his screams into a 5th vernacular. 12. The boy he entered was put into no more than an urn, than a tawdry vessel. 13. Sacrifice, noun, a giving up of something valued for someone or something else considered to be of more value. The radius giving itself to the owner, the man himself hidden in the dark creases of vein rope and contraction and arteries hierophant drum. The man, 13, stepped out of the dark and into where the cut welcomed the room's wattage. 13, stepped into the light, his face a cut, a black hyphen from which all speech. 13, from which all darkness was made legible. 13, the single mouth, his total face. 13, he would touch and call himself many names. 13, call himself a god, but he was no god. 13, but was easy to believe him a god, to walk to him, to relive how he got there. 13, stutter and suck. 13, with the sound of the cut closing in on them both to hold them there. 13, as before in the dark, when no one was around, blood wild with knowledge. 13, the man approached, was a knowledge himself, his face the one written page. 13, his option the sole option. He would take the boy, be mnemonic, be what had always been prefaced to. He reached out his hand. 14, and his fingers, thumbnail carving the boy's cheek, touched like flies. You all want a happy poem? Yeah, nope. All right, I might have a little something that ain't that. Nope, it's not here. A little background information about it. So I wrote Thief in the Interior, all of it, or the majority of it in grad school. That was 2012 through 14. We all know what was happening in 2012 and 14. That was we were saying goodbye. We were getting ready to say goodbye to President Obama. But that was also maybe the last 2 years of an 8-year span of depression I was going through. And so the book in many ways chronicles the things that I emotionally couldn't really figure out without the poems. And trying to, in all of the cruelty, the difficulty, the violence, find something beautiful. So even though the poems are heavy in their topics, I did want to bring a kind of aesthetic quality to the grotesque. So that's the thesis of Thief in the Interior, if there's such a thing. Which is why I'm very grateful to have readers who can follow with the poems and will come to readings and snap and gasp and do all those things and listen to my bad jokes. So I just have maybe 2 more poems. I'll read one more from the book. Elegoo and Eshu ain't the same. I'm listening to Alice Coltrane to feel blacker than God while I pull gray hairs out my head. 1 wish, 2 wish. I can't stand my own body can't stand itself, so my hair spirals like rivers storming up to the sky. My hands are ashy and Jergens don't help. Might as well use water. Might as well turn my fingers into the rivers my sister's ex-boyfriend taught me, the strange ways men touch each other, the codices writing themselves in tribes. Don't forget, you can't forget. What colors could I wear more dangerous than the one I was born with? Collard greens and cigarette smoke in my clothes, Johnny Walker strutting down an uncle's throat. When one wows out, his brother rubs his back. You a damn fool. Some blues got into the potato salad. Some wang-dang doodle found a home in my 10-year-old hips. My body don't give a damn about me like my mind do. Growing up, I snapped Barbie's head from her body. I snapped like Shaka Khan at the end of Through the Fire. There is rage in the chicken fried so hard, the bone's edible. I suck on the marrow to blacken my gums. Somebody pulled out the Crown Royal bag to find a quarter and a shirt button, sewed that shit in on the spot and gave a neighbor bus fare. I'm going down is playing and I can't tell which woman is singing it. Must be Rolls Royce, cause her sorrow don't sound like Mary's dirge, though they both got 2 sets of wings sprouting from their lips. All God's chilling got. And someone reneges at the table and we all ignore the gunshots down the street. Our name's not on the bullets, they aim around here. Spade cut a heart, now a heart's on the table breaking hearts. When am I? I'm 16 and watching a friend rub the blue dye off a boy's jeans onto her white pants, ass looking like a spring sky. His face humiliated with lust. Was it Aaliyah or Outcast that got her jinxing color from cloth, coaxing a boy into manhood that faded swiftly? Me and you, your mama and your cousin too, sneaking us liquor on the back porch, birthday cake and shit talk in the air, somebody back inside raging about high school beef, kick his ass out the party, let him stand by the door, be security, can't let everybody in the house. I'm back with my family and my sisters playing with the dead again, crying to the glossolalia of the crossroads. The one white boy we had on the block got shot. They called him Cornflake. I don't know what year I'm in anymore. Eazy-E dead, Tupac and Biggie still breathing. The Isley brothers sing, Make Me Say It Again, Girl, and my sister and I sing what we know. Make me say so you won't be lonely. The generations have conspired against me. River in my head, I'm pulling and pulling. Somebody in my head want out. I stopped singing in church when the songs didn't make the dead come back. My rage stopped working too. The cursing in shadows, my shadow boxing, the house so safe it wasn't safe no more. I must have hid that part of me under the doorstep outside, went back to look, and I was gone. called The Shame. It begins with the memory of feet and above the swollen ankles of Grandma Elizabeth's leg, cartographic with varicose veins, bulbous and slurring beneath my fingertips as I traced what I thought was the blue of sorrow lacing its way like an endless brook throughout her body, which was a body whose toes I had rubbed one at a time with lotion to the sound of my grandmother chewing on a peppermint or breathing slow and hard as I relieved whatever journey from beneath her feet sour with duty and the power to make a walk from room to room into a meal and a game of checkers, where I learned that stacking 2 soldiers made a king, which would become useful later on in life, as I found myself making lonesome towers with my body and another's while we cataloged our grievances with the sharing of tongues. And here, one desire usurps another, but I'll mend this memory toward honesty. For my grandmother's feet knew speed and precision when necessary, to run across the squeaking floor for a broom to whack the shit out of me if I frightened her while she exited the bathroom, pausing just a bit at the knob as though anticipating the boy me's hunger to hear her scream with a round soprano, "Stupid, you trying to kill me?" And here again the truth stalls, because beneath me on the first floor where her room was kingdom of perfumes, shawls, and jewelry, this woman up and died while I laid in bed on the second floor right above her, and I was sure the chill I felt was either her passing through the floor and through me, then through the roof, and into the sky where the morning sun was still cool and from which chickadees dropped their small bodies into the grass for seeds to pulverize in trees. Or it was the angel of my thinking unblanketing from me my own innocence, knowing that my old lady went somewhere and left her body behind to be found by her children, and for a moment I was closest to her, just a single story away, meaning the narrative that was the air itself crawling between my floorboards and her ceiling was the last thing we shared, and no one else can have that. And here the dark bathroom and the metal doorknob with her fingers placed on the chilly arc in the darkness is how she slowly unlocked me from myself, like the sun unlocked from my body its own shadow. And I hated myself for being so unwilling to let death do what death does, and witness her final days of her hardly sipping water, her lying in bed alone and endlessly tired, and my selfish teenage self is here now, looking up from the cloud of this memory, shaking his head and swearing under his breath, swearing at me even now, too shy or too absurd with shame to run from that old house and into the distraction of maple tree seeds whirligigging their papery blades into the weeds and the white fluff of dandelions and into the street and scream about something being too much or not knowing how to love then. So lay the fuck off me, man, just lay the fuck off. So I must forgive him, who is my earlier self, is avoiding that room, is avoiding her eyes, yellowed by chemo, is avoiding her feet, and is now missing that cane, tapping out the minutes of the day that now his later self holds in the highest regard. As I lay alone to sleep, listening to my downstairs neighbors make love in their loudest voices. Thank you.
Wow, that was a great reading. I want to thank again Philip and Liz. Let's have another round of applause. And I want to thank also again Kathleen Torres and Haley Pope, who did really wonderful introductions. Thank you guys. And just again as a reminder, we have another reading here tomorrow night, the same room, 7:45 and 7:30 tonight at 7:45. Thank you, 7:30. We'll be hearing from Jung Yun, Patricia Horvath, and Christopher Kemp. And then tomorrow at 4:30 in McLaren 252, all the writers will be trapped there. and you will be able to ask them questions. So if you're free, we hope you will join us. Don't forget, we have books for sale. We have the books of both Philip and Liz, but we have the books for all the writers. So please support the writers and get your books signed. So thank you guys.